F1 fans, welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with me Vasco, David and Harry, and in this episode we'll have testing analysis before the 2024 Formula 1 season, and also you'll hear for the first time our season predictions. Let's start with the testing analysis. We had 3 days in Bahrain where the teams showed their cars for the first time before the opening lap of the season. And we'll start with probably the worst performance of the weekend, and that was Alpine.
Yeah, Alpine were the slowest in terms of overall time. The best time they set was with Esteban Ocon on 132.0, and they also were 8th in terms of most amount of laps done. Alpine look awful. Not only is their car ugly in itself, but they have no pace. The Renault engine is looking quite miserable, as it always does. There's speculation that a lot of top engineers are going to get fired because of how bad the car is truly performing. And it's really puzzling how this team that is so ambitious and actually works with a pretty decent budget is failing so bad. They also have 2 pretty good drivers. It's a good driver lineup. Esteban Ocon, Pierre Gasly, both race winners in F1. What do you guys think is the problem at Alpine?
Well, we're sure I can say that Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly are not the problem of that team. Everything from engineering point, I think, is messed in that team, and they're continuing to do the same thing every season. And I don't think, at least before 2026, that anything is going to change there. So I think it will simply be another disappointing season in F1 for Alpine, and the testing only proves my point.
I think that the delivery matches the car performance. They're both poor, and Alpine have been mediocre for quite a few seasons, and I think that they're just going even backwards. They're not improving like other teams mostly do, but they're just even going to be worse than last season. And we can move on to Haas, who were last in the previous season, and I think that they're not going to be much better this year.
I would say that it was impressive that Haas had the most amount of laps throughout the entire preseason testing, 441. Their pace was not great. I mean, Kevin Magnussen was dead last in terms of lap time. Nico Hülkenberg was a bit better, but still you could hope for something more. Haas have already admitted that their car is not where they want it to be, and they're just focusing on tire wear, their reliability, and being consistent with race pace. They have a long way to go. I think they had a good test, but they will fall behind in the development race as their budget doesn't really allow them to develop the car a whole lot, and I think that's the biggest issue there for Haas.
I don't expect something interesting for them, and I'm waiting for the moment that they would rethink their whole participation in the sport, because I don't see light at the end of the tunnel for Haas. Let's move to Aston Martin, and the team with Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll didn't show amazing performances in the preseason testing, and I think this is going to be a reflection of what is waiting for them throughout this season. I don't expect anything spectacular from them. They proved that during the training, but I expect Fernando Alonso to have some glimpses of great performances, but overall not really high grade from me for them.
I agree. I think that this season is not going to be as impressive as the last one, and their start won't be as amazing as it was last year. The car is going to be worse, and they're not going to develop that much. I think that it's, as we saw last season, the car was like at a constant level. It did not even improve at any point during the season. So
yeah, I remember last year how hyped everyone was with Fernando Alonso's pace and testing, and this year it's very far from that story. And if they're starting the season with like a car that is doing the 8th best lap in testing, it's just testing, but still their pace is way off comparison to last season. And knowing Aston Martin's development, it's actually kind of concerning to see where they are at the start of the season.
Going to the team with the fourth lowest time of this preseason testing, and this is McLaren. And I think this season is going to be similar to the past few seasons for McLaren. They're not going to be the sharpest at the start of the season, but after that, I think they'll have some constant and great upgrades. And the development throughout the season, I hope it will be good for McLaren because their drivers deserve that. And we see that the team has the potential. They haven't been that great in this qualifying session, but in this testing session, but I don't think we can expect a lot at the beginning of the season from McLaren. I think, again, to say the most important thing will be the development throughout the season, and I hope going to the second part of the 2024 that we'll see McLaren having better car and Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris having something to compete at least for podiums.
I'm very disappointed with McLaren in their testing because this was a team that seemed like it was the second best car for the second half of last season, and I expected them to follow through with this momentum and show up with a car that is at least on par with the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes. And that has not been the case, and they've actually struggled a lot with reliability, setting the 9th most laps, only more than Williams. I think it's quite concerning for McLaren. It's just going back to square one, and they're going to have to gain back all of the time that they will be losing to the big teams. And it's disappointing because we've grown to expect McLaren, big team, historic franchise, to do better than what they're doing right now.
Let's also consider Williams' performance. They had the 6th most laps, and they had the least laps out of all, and they had the 6th best time. And I think that they have some serious reliability problems which they have to solve in order for them to be competitive, and the car is not going to be a major improvement of last year's one.
We will see. The most interesting part about the team during this season is going to be Alex Albon, in my opinion. But if he doesn't have the car, this is going to harm both his team and his future. So I don't know what to say really about Williams because they're in that constant loop that things are not really improving for them, and even in the seasons where they're not last, their car is still not on par even for fighting for the mid positions. So I don't expect anything quite fascinating from Williams throughout 2024. But
let's move on to RB. They actually had a pretty decent pace throughout testing. We saw Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo put in some good laps and a solid amount of laps as well. Pretty consistent. I think that they will improve in comparison to last season. Similar to the car, how it was at the end of last season, I feel like that will be the pace that we should expect from the car to start the season.
I agree. I think that they're going to have a better season than last one, and their car seems to be better at the beginning of the year, so maybe they're going to keep it up and improve their position in the constructor standings.
I think the most important thing for the team will be that non-toxic environment, and they should make everything possible to keep it that way because Tsunoda and Ricciardo are great pilots, great personalities, and I think this year it is going to be positive for them in the end. Moving on to the big Red Bull, the winner of the past few championships, and testing wasn't super dominant, but we saw some great things for them. We saw great tempo from Verstappen. Sergio Perez also recorded quite an alright laps, but I think we haven't seen enough from Red Bull to say what is going to happen throughout the season. But still, I think they have an edge over their opponent.
I think that day one really spoke for itself when Max Verstappen beat everyone by over a second. They were amazed that the pace of the Red Bull is just continuing to be a revolution of a car. And I think they took it easier the next 2 days because they figured out that they have a lot of pace and they don't need to show it in comparison to some other teams that seem to be getting closer to them. But I think that, especially with Max Verstappen behind the wheel, they will continue having an edge.
I agree with you guys. They had a pretty decent mileage, and we can move on to Sauber, who may have impressed some because they had quite decent times. They also had the fourth most laps, and they may actually be better than last year. And Guan Yu Zhou had the fourth best time. So if they can also show the same pace during the Bahrain Grand Prix, maybe, who knows?
It was very impressive, maybe one of the most impressive teams throughout testing, as you mentioned, Joe, with an incredible lap. But also they had a pretty good amount of mileage as well, finishing fourth in terms of lap times. But my biggest concern is this team will fall off in development, kind of similar to 2022. Remember Valtteri Bottas's great start to the season, and then that car just kind of plummeted down the standings and couldn't get into the points whatsoever. I think we'll see a similar story this year.
We cannot be sure what is going to happen throughout the season, but after the testing, there is one thing that we all saw, I think, and this is that the Ferrari engine is actually pretty reliable and it's a bit faster as for now compared to what was it during the last year. So maybe this year will be a bit better for the cars that have Ferrari engines, but we should wait and see because in Bahrain the picture can be totally different. So moving on to Mercedes, and they didn't have a really poor qualifying session, although testing session, but we still saw some great laps. For example, George Russell, he was 3rd overall, and Lewis Hamilton, he was 10th overall. That wasn't his best testing session, but I think they're still a secret for everybody that is watching F1 what they will look like at the beginning of the season. So they remain mystery for me.
I think it was an okay testing for them, but I feel like it was slightly disappointing in a way. I think they are a step below Ferrari based on the testing and don't really look like they're going to be challenging Red Bull, at least in the first half of the season.
Yeah, I was disappointed with the mileage they had. They only had the 7th most laps. And as David said, they're going to be behind Ferrari probably. So I don't expect great things for Mercedes this season.
Going to Ferrari, and everything looked promising for these 3 days. And I think every Ferrari fan, they're not as excited as the team is looking like a championship contender, but I think every Ferrari fan is looking exciting as there are going to be better things throughout the season, and the team looks a bit better right now compared to what was the mess at the end of the last year.
I would agree. Testing was almost perfect for Ferrari. 1-2 in terms of lap times. Carlos Sainz the only one to go into the 129s all weekend. And their only hiccup was really going over that drain cover, which damaged Charles Leclerc's floor. But other than that, they looked really good. Even though they have the 2 best times, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Red Bull are still there. Ferrari are not first, that's for sure. But I think they are better than everyone else in terms of competition for Red Bull.
Ferrari, they were very impressive, and I think that they're going to be Red Bull's closest challengers for the title, and they're going to be, unfortunately, above Mercedes in the constructors.
And now, can we move on to the most interesting part, prediction time? We can start from our pilots' predictions, and we can make them on chunks of 5. So I think David should start first.
Okay, so in 20th place, just like last year, it's going to be Logan Sargent. 19th, Kevin Magnussen. 18th, Joe Guan Yu. 17th, Nico Hulkenberg. And 16th, Yuki Tsunoda. What about you guys?
Well, mine are almost the same. 20th place for Logan Sargent. 19th place for Kevin Magnussen. 18th for Guan Yu Zhou. 17 for Nico Hülkenberg, and 16 for Alex Albon. We're almost the same.
We didn't talk about this beforehand, we swear.
Interesting. Mine are a little bit different as I don't have Sargent in 20th. I rather have Kevin Magnussen and Hülkenberg in 19th. Then I have Sargent in 18th, Guan Yu Zhou in 17th, and Bottas in 16th. Because I think that Haas are gonna be terrible again.
For me, it's the same with Haas, but I don't think they'll be the slowest one on the grid this season. And I think Williams may have the slowest car because that Mercedes engine doesn't look amazing. And overall, I don't think that Williams will make some outstanding innovations in their car throughout the season. So most probably their car would be the 10th fastest, but because they have Alex Albon, I think that would be the deal breaker, and that is why I think he would be a bit better than the rest of the pilots. For Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, we know very well what's the thing with them. Haas, they're not the best team in F1. They're alright pilots, Nico and K-Mag, but in the end of the season, I think they're going to be at very close to the bottom. And for Guan Yu Zhou, I don't expect Team Start Kick Sauber to be good or anything, but I still think Zhou Guanyu can show some great performances. Even he can get into the top 10 a few times throughout the season, but again, nothing spectacular from them.
I agree with most of your assessments since we have the almost exact same bottom five, except I have Yuki Tsunoda because I feel like he might trip over himself throughout the season. But let's move on to our 11th to 15th place standings. So in 15th, I have Esteban Ocon. In 14th, Valtteri Bottas. In 13th, Daniel Ricciardo. In 12th, Pierre Gasly. And in 11th, Alex Albon.
Well, this time they're a bit different, but the same actors are there. 15th for me is Valtteri Bottas. 14th is Sir Lance Stroll. 13th is Esteban Ocon. 12th is the first RB Visa Cash App pilot, Yuki Tsunoda. And 11th is the second pilot of Alpine, Pierre Gasly.
I have similar names to yours, they're in a different order. Ocon is 15th, then Stroll in 14th. Alex Albon is way better than your predictions, he's in 13th in mine. Then Gasly is 12th and Tsunoda 11th, as I think that RB are gonna be better than last season and they're gonna have the drivers quite above what they achieved last season.
I really think this is Alex Albon's year. I was deliberating putting him in the top 10, but I assume that Williams will drag him down just a little bit, and I put him 11th. Still better than all of the bottom half teams. The two Alpines, even though they had shocking testing, they have good drivers, and I think they have the budget to develop ahead of teams like Williams and RB.
What about Alpine then? Because as I already said, Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, really good driver pairing, but tests were not promising, and their last few seasons they weren't promising too. So I think they're not going to have the greatest of seasons, and even though I've put the two pilots 11th and 13th, I think if some of the teams play their cards great, and especially talking about RB and Aston Martin, I think Ocon and Gasly can be even lower in this ranking at the end of the season.
I completely agree with your opinion, and I think you can notice this from my rankings, because I think that Alpine aren't gonna develop enough, and some teams may jump them in the standings.
Well, we'll see. I don't think these teams will be Haas or Sauber or even Williams, but the rest of the teams going to the end of the season, I think Alpine will have huge problems. Can we move on to our top 10?
Let's go to the top 10. And Harry, how about you start this time?
Okay. So 10th place is for Danny Rick, then 9th is Alonso, 8th for Oscar Piastri, 7th for George Russell, and 6th for Lewis Hamilton. I've put both Mercedes drivers outside the top 5 because from what you've heard already, I think that Mercedes is gonna have a bad season and they're gonna be lower in the Constructors' Championship. Let me see what yours are, guys.
Well, I think we have a trend because I have the exact same positions. Because I can say that our analysis of the preseason is really similar because I have put them in the exact same order.
That is crazy. That is just crazy. Mine are a little different. So in 10th place, we have Lance Stroll. In 9th place, we have Oscar Piastri. 8th place, Fernando Alonso. 7th place, George Russell. And 6th place, Lando Norris. I decided to keep Lando Norris outside the top 5 because I am not impressed with McLaren. And going back to last year, Lewis Hamilton's consistency was so strong that I feel like it will give him an edge in the championship. And I put him in the top 5. Whereas I left out Norris. And I also think Lance Stroll, even though you guys both put Lance Stroll pretty low, I think that there is such a big gap between the top 5 and the bottom 5 that Lance Stroll will just consistently rack up like lower end points, but he'll still consistently get points. And I think 10th place is almost a walk in the park for him.
I don't think so because with a cash-up RB can have a great season in my opinion, and with that driver pairing of Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, they can do some great stuff. And I've put Daniel Ricciardo at number 10, but I have really high hopes for Yuki Tsunoda to have a great season too. So I think you're a bit overestimating the power of Aston Martin, and I think the previous season was a bit strange for them because Fernando Alonso took too much from the car, in my opinion. And if Lance continues to perform in his usual fashion, then Aston Martin are going to be much worse than what we saw in 2023. But for the rest, I think McLaren will have a great second half of the season, and that is what is going to take that 7th or even 6th place from Oscar Piastri. And that is why I think he's going to be 8th, because of the start of the season. In the end, he can even have some podium finishes, but at the start of the season, I don't think he'll get enough points, and that would be enough for Hamilton and George Russell to secure 6th and 7th.
I don't have anything to add. It's almost as if you read my mind, We're so similar in predictions this time. And I think that we can actually move on to the most interesting part of the drivers' predictions, which is our top 5. Let's see if they're the same this time.
I think we can review them one by one this time. So I will start first, and my 5th place is for Sergio Perez.
My 5th place is for Lewis Hamilton.
And my 5th place is for Lando Norris.
Oh my god, we actually have different opinions, guys.
Okay, I can start with my argumentation because Red Bull, I think they're not going to be as dominant as they were last year, but still they're going to have better car than the rest of the teams. But still, I lost my passion and my belief in Checo Perez because during the last year, his qualifying tempo was not promising at all, and there were some races that he overtook like 10 cars and he was still 5th, and I don't think that should be happening. And I think the ego of Checo is damaged now, and this season is not going to be better than the previous one. And I think in closer battle with Mercedes, McLaren and Ferrari, I think during the final races of the season, Checo would be exposed, and that is why I think he's going to end up in the 5th place.
That's a fair assessment of it. Sergio Perez was very bad last season, it has to be said. My 5th place, Lewis Hamilton. I kind of mentioned it in the last segment. You guys both had him outside the top 5. I think he is very consistent, still at the top of his game. And even though this is last season for Mercedes, maybe not that motivated to drive for them anymore, I still don't see any reason for him to be lower in the standings. I think Mercedes' overall performance will be better than McLaren throughout the entire season. They'll be more consistent. They'll be racking up more points, especially early on. And I just don't see that consistency with McLaren as well, which is why I have Lewis Hamilton in 5th.
Even though I'm a Mercedes fan, I cannot agree that McLaren are gonna be worse, as I think that McLaren, if they start the season stronger than they did the last few years, they're gonna finish ahead of Mercedes. And with Lando Norris as their driver, I think that he also may overperform the car and be ahead of Lewis Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship.
I think most of the people before the season thinks that Lando Norris is going to have monstrous season, but I don't think it's only the opinion of the fans. I think for Lando, he needs to have that best season of his career. So before 2025 and the regulations in 2026, he'll need to have that comfort so that he knows, yeah, I'm the guy. I can do it. And I think this season is going to be super important for him. And we can move to the fourth place as I started with. Lando Norris going to fourth place in my predictions.
In fourth place, I went back and forth on this one, but I decided to keep Carlos Sainz in fourth place.
I have Sergio Perez, and Vasco said that he has lost his faith. I have as well, but I still think that he may just do enough to be ahead of Lando Norris, even though he's gonna have poor results again. I think that it's gonna be really close, maybe.
But the question here for me is it going to be Checo or the car? Because if he gets the maximum of this car, he can be championship contender. But Checo doesn't get what he wants from the car. And I think this is the bigger problem in Red Bull. And that is it's looking like they're losing their second seat or they're simply not getting enough from their number 2 pilot.
That is true, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, do we really think a McLaren can beat a Red Bull in the Drivers' Championship? I don't think so. I think that Red Bull is too good, and Lando Norris, yes, very important season for him, as you mentioned. I don't think he has the car that can deliver good performances regularly. And I think that Carlos Sainz, I put him number 4. That Ferrari looks really good. Carlos Sainz was really good last year. I just think that maybe the car will kind of hold him back from breaking into the top 3, which is why I've put him behind Perez, for example. And I think he will have some good highs, but will overall be outperformed by Charles Leclerc, mainly down to qualifying pace, and overall just a longer stint with the team. We know that Charles is the golden boy there, so he will be getting preferential treatment.
I think we can move on to our top 3s. And I want to open mine with Carlos Sainz. I think he'll have a great season this time, and he may be a bit bothered because of the situation that happened in Ferrari. We all know what happened with Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz, but I have really high expectations for Carlos Sainz after what I saw last season, and his ability to control the car, to remain calm, and to get the best out of most situations, I think will be crucial. And that is why I've put the Ferrari driver at number 3. And I think it will be really close battle between him and Charles Leclerc. And I can even say that this will be the closest, not points-wise, because we have people like Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, but performance-wise, the battle between Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, for me, will be the closest one of all the teammates in F1 during this season.
I can see that, but I kind of disagree. So in third place, I have Sergio Perez, but to go on the point that you were talking about, the closest teammate rivalry potentially for this season, let's think back to 2022 where Ferrari had a car that could fight for the title, especially at the start of the season. Charles Leclerc was constantly fighting for the win. Carlos Sainz was usually nowhere, 20 seconds behind, something like that. It's just that Carlos Sainz, whenever he has a car that can fight for the win, he feels the pressure and he cracks under it. We've seen at Silverstone when he won the race, but we remember the start of the race where he ran off the track and Max Verstappen took the lead. And there's been these moments with Carlos Sainz that has questioned my faith in him if he were constantly fighting at the front.
But right now, I think he has the experience and he doesn't have any pressure on him because he knows that after this season, he'll be leaving Ferrari. So if he's given a fast car, I think he'll maximize the performance of it and he won't care about any team orders or anything. He'll just enjoy himself and he can even get 1 or even 2, 3 wins throughout the season. I have real faith in him.
I also think that Sainz has reached a new stage of his career. We saw in Singapore he was really calm actually when leading the race. He wasn't, even though, as David said, he was under pressure. I think that he is a better driver now, and as Vasco said, he may get like an occasional win here and there. And Ferrari is going to be better, and that is why I think that Sergio Perez is gonna be left behind in the championship, as he's not going to perform.
And moving on, I think all of us have a similar top 2. So the more interesting question, I think, is there going to be title battle between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen?
I do not think so. Max Verstappen will still crush, as he always does. I mean, some speculate, is he going to get a 24 out of 24? That car looks unbelievable. I really hope he doesn't. But to focus on Charles Leclerc, I think he has incredible pace and he will get quite a few pole positions, okay? Maybe even 7 or 8. That's how much pace he has. And I would be disappointed, of course, if he doesn't mount a title challenge. But I think that he will prove this year that only Max Verstappen stands in the way between himself and the world title.
I can actually agree with your opinion, as I think that the Red Bull is going to be much faster than the other cars, and even though Ferrari is going to be improved, and we all know Max Verstappen how good he is right now, he's going to leave no chance to Charles.
I'm on the exact same opinion because Max Verstappen is just too good right now. And in the end of the season, even if that Red Bull is not as dominant as the last year, again, I think Verstappen is not going to have any problems getting another world title, and Charles Leclerc is not even going to be close to him.
Just a quick question about second place in the championship. Do we think Charles Leclerc is going to be close to the guys behind, or will he have a gap? What do you guys think about that?
I don't think so. I think he'll be fairly close to Carlos Sainz, and depending on that Ferrari engine and the whole Ferrari aerodynamics and everything in the car, and of course the strategy, because we know that is always a problem with Ferrari. If they accomplish great things throughout the season with all the things I said, I think there is going to be a gap between Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris, but again, there is going to be gap between Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. So essentially, Ferrari will be comfortably at second and third place, but I don't think they're going to be even any close to Max Verstappen.
I can agree with that.
So, moving on to the teams, and I can start with my bottom 10. On 10th place, I have Haas, 9th place, Williams, 8th place, Stake, aka Sauber, 7th place for Alpine, 6th place for Visa Cash App Red Bull.
Mine in 10th place, Haas as well. 9th, I have Sauber. In 8th, Williams. 7th, RB. And in 6th, Alpine. Even though they look terrible, I still think they'll find a way to gain some development and squeak into 6th place.
I have the same ones as Vasco once again, so maybe we need to discuss, like with David, why we think so.
Well, I already said that I have high hope for Visa Cash App RB and low expectations for Alpine. The rest of them, Haas are poor, Williams looks poor, Stake looks poor, but a bit better than these two teams. And that is why I think that the performances of the pilots are not going to be as crucial as the performances of the car. And if they have, especially for Alpine and Visa Cash App RB, if they have great development of their cars, this is going to prove crucial for that fight for 6th place.
Why do you think that one driver might not be a factor? Because we saw Alex Albon last year single-handedly drag the Williams into 7th place in the constructors. Why wouldn't he be able to beat Sauber, for example, in the standings?
Because I think here the Stake car will be a bit better throughout the whole season, and experienced person like Valtteri Bottas can have some great races with it. And on the other side, Williams, I think they're going to be, especially during the first half of the season, they're going to be so far away from the points that at some point a gap like 5 or 6 points will look like an eternity between Williams and Stake.
We can move on to the top 5. I'm gonna start 5th place for Aston Martin, then 4th, unfortunately, for Mercedes, 3rd for McLaren, 2nd for Ferrari, and 1st for Red Bull. I know it is surprising that Mercedes are so low, but I think that McLaren is gonna be more consistent this year and they're gonna have a better car, and as we know, their drivers are amazing. So I am just quite a big pessimist about Mercedes' performance this year.
I really don't understand where this Mercedes doubt is coming from. In 5th place, I also have Aston Martin, 4th McLaren, 3rd Mercedes, 2nd Ferrari, and 1st Red Bull.
My predictions are the same as Harry. 5th for Aston Martin, 4th for Mercedes, 3rd for McLaren, 2nd Ferrari, and 1st Red Bull. And I know that I may underestimate Mercedes, but I believe in McLaren. And I think this is going to be the season that both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, when they have a well-developed car, they're going to show what they can do.
I don't know where this belief can come from for McLaren, because they have never proven to us that they are a good team in the last 10 years. They've never finished in the top 3. Mercedes have the budget. They have arguably a better driver lineup than McLaren. They have one of the greatest drivers of all time. I don't see why Mercedes wouldn't do what they keep on doing. Even after their championship seasons, they challenged Ferrari for 2nd in 2022. They were very close, even though their car was significantly worse. They always scored points. And last year as well, they managed to clinch 2nd in an extremely competitive field for 2nd. Their drivers are super consistent. I don't see how they don't finish outside the top 3.
You may be right, but for me, I've been doing for the past 5 or 6 seasons Formula 1 predictions, and it's super boring every time when we see that McLaren have poor results in testing, and after that we're like, oh no, this is not going to be their year, and they do the same thing every year. And I think this year it will be a bit different, as they would find a way to develop their car better and have more races with great pace, and it's purely on belief. Right now, McLaren looks very far away from Mercedes, but don't forget that the first 1, 2, 5, 10 races may not be that important if McLaren are better at the second half of the season.
They were better in the second half of last season, and they were still 100 points behind.
They will be even better.
My conclusion is that Vasco and I have boarded the McLaren hype train, and let's see what happens. I can't wait. I think we all can't wait. We also want to know your predictions, guys, so leave them in the comments below.
And I have some things that I want to say before we close our predictions. I have 3 super random predictions, and we can see if even one of them happens before the end of the season. I have at least 5 different race winners this season, and namely Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, and that first win for Lando Norris. And the next one will be that Visa Cash App RB, Alpine, and Aston Martin will have a super tiny gap between them at the end of the season, looking at the Constructors' Championship, of course. And the last one will be that at least 2 unexpected drivers will be on the podium, namely here Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda.
That is quite interesting, it must be said. I put some of my own. I would say they're maybe not as bold as yours. Mine are vaguer, I guess, to an extent, but I went for an Alex Albon podium. I went for Fernando Alonso retires from the sport. And I also went, maybe to you guys, this is not really a controversial take at all, but I don't think Lewis Hamilton gets a single win in his last season for Mercedes, and he will go with 3 winless seasons to end his time at the Silver Arrows.
I can agree here.
Yes, both of your predictions were great. I also liked Vasco's ones. They were quite bold. And from what you can see in this episode, we can agree on like almost everything. So I'm gonna say the same. And I truly hope that Lando Norris gets that elusive win finally.
And guys, before we end this episode, once again, we want to remind you that on March 2nd, in BAC Auditorium, from 4 p.m. we'll be live streaming the race, and we'll have a pre-race discussion and Q&A session after the race. Be there, we'll be waiting for you. It will be super fun.
we can conclude this episode. This is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode and our main event, which is coming up. And till then, like, subscribe, and follow us on AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook. And stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
If you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.